and what has to change systemically so that it doesn't feel like our careers, our positions, our advancement is at stake when we talk about what we care about. So that's a whole other rabbit hole I will save for another conversation. But what, from your perspective, what are some steps that I'd say, not even perspective, what in your experience as well as a lawyer, what are some steps that people can take to empower themselves in a workplace volunteer context?
Got it. Okay. I love this part. Now, this is not legal advice. This is my disclaimer as a lawyer. So I'm providing legal information based on case law research and my experience, but this is not legal advice. Okay. So now that that's said, the most important thing to do as an employee or an independent contractor is to know what your rights are and know what the parameters of your relationship with your employer are. Okay, so that means reread your contract. Maybe you never read your contract. You just signed it because you were happy to have a job. Now is the time to reread your contract. And then reread or check, at least make sure you have a copy of the policy manual and take a look what the steps are for performance reviews, for social media, for making a complaint, for harassment and discrimination. Read the definitions. And what you're looking for is, what are the procedural fairness measures that the employer has committed to implement vis-a-vis you or anyone in the workplace? Because that's what you're going to call them on if something happens, because procedural fairness is like how things should go if something is to be fair, aside from the outcome, aside from your positionality. And that's how you can say, well, no, it says here in the policy, I'm allowed to bring a support person. I want to bring a support person to this interview, and I can't get that person until next week, so I'm not coming in. And so that's one example, right? Make sure you have copies of all of these things, or you've downloaded them to your personal, like you have them at home, so that if for some reason your access is cut off to the company databases or to your email, you don't have to look for things that could possibly be evidence later. Okay. And then also remember that everything that you've ever put in writing is evidence for your employer, and is actually owned by your employer if you're using their email or their computer, or it's on any kind of software program like Teams that is owned by the computer that you use at work, and online is the workplace, right? And now we're also seeing how social media and the personal social media accounts of employees is the main site where people have been targeted for using. They're not using their work social media. They're posting as themselves. You could try to use a disclaimer, but that's not going to prevent you from being called up or interviewed or possibly reprimanded or suspended if you say something that is seen as being against the workplace values. So that's the other thing, is understand what your workplace's values are, stated and expressed. Read previous media releases or internal or public statements that your leadership has put out around the Israeli occupation of Palestine or any issues. So you can say, well, I was following what you said in 2014 or 2021. Understand what the stated policies are. This is another one. Do a bit of research. And a lot of this stuff should be publicly available if you're working for a not-for-profit. Who funds your organization? Who are the philanthropic foundations that fund your org? Where is money coming from? Because that will also help you understand how your employer is going to react and why. So you just go in knowing what's like, with a lot more information. And, I could, if you want me to, talk about some of the factors that would be considered when an employer is looking at your social media posts. It's often brought to their attention by somebody else who says to your employer. I mean, we have global news firing a Palestinian journalist who was on mat leave. Her name is Zahra Al-Akras, and she's posted widely about what happened, but she was on mat leave and she was using her personal social media. And so, you know, one of the things they'll ask you to do if it's like typically in these situations is delete the post and stop posting, right? We have Central Toronto Youth Services asking counselors who organized an amazing grief session for queer and trans youth to have a place to talk about what's going on. The name of it referenced Palestine and the grief over the genocide against Palestinians. They had to change the title of that. I mean, there is censorship happening over this issue in particular in so many ways.